The sky was torn asunder. It began as a distant, almost imperceptible flicker of light, growing steadily brighter as it drew closer. A roar of thunder rippled through the air, but it wasn't thunder. It was the sound of an invasion. Earth had never faced anything like this. The first wave of the Vikor fleet arrived without warning, their warships massive and seemingly endless, blocking out the sun as they descended from the heavens. Humanity had no idea what was coming. The initial strikes were quick, brutal, and precise, an overwhelming wave of destruction. Cities were wiped off the map in seconds, their towering skylines reduced to rubble, their citizens vaporized in a flash of energy. Earth's military forces scrambled, sending jets and missiles into the air, but their weapons were useless. The Vikor's shields absorbed everything, leaving nothing but burning wreckage in their wake. The sky was filled with the terrible beauty of the Vikor ships, each one gliding effortlessly through the atmosphere, their guns flashing like the teeth of a beast hungry for destruction. No one could fight back. The world's greatest minds and most advanced weapons were no match for the alien superior technology. The Vikor didn't even seem to be in any hurry. They took their time, making sure humanity knew they were hopelessly outmatched. Jonas Harris wasn't supposed to survive. He was just a soldier, a grunt, really part of a small military unit sent to help defend one of the last strongholds. His platoon was stationed at the outskirts of a major city when the attack began. They had received word that a fleet of alien ships was incoming, but nothing could have prepared them for what followed. The first blast came from above, a pulse of light that struck the command center and turned it into an inferno. The shockwave hit seconds later, throwing Jonas and his men to the ground. The world turned into chaos. His comrades were cut down in an instant, their screams swallowed by the explosion that followed. Jonas was knocked unconscious by the blast, but somehow, by some miracle, he lived. When he came to, everything had changed. The city was in ruins, buildings half collapsed, fires raging in every direction. The ground was littered with debris, the air thick with dust and smoke. Jonas, disoriented and barely able to stand, pulled himself up, instinctively reaching for his weapon. But there was no time for fear, no time for regret. He had one goal: survival. He moved cautiously, staying low, trying to make sense of the destruction around him. There were no signs of life. The Vikor were everywhere, moving through the ruins with terrifying ease, their advanced technology enabling them to find and eliminate anyone who dared to resist. Jonas was one of the lucky few to have survived, but he knew that his time was limited. The Vikor would be hunting down any human still alive, and he needed to get out before they found him. For hours, he moved through the broken city, navigating the crumbling streets and dodging the alien patrols. He had no plan, no strategy, just a burning instinct to stay alive. Eventually, he stumbled upon an old warehouse that hadn't been destroyed, its steel doors still intact. It was a small, dark space, but it offered shelter. Jonas collapsed inside, catching his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time, he allowed himself a moment to reflect on what had happened. Earth was under attack. Humanity was being wiped out. But he wasn't dead. And as long as he was still breathing, there was hope. Little did he know, this one survival, this single, miraculous escape, would mark the first mistake the Vikor would make, underestimating the will of humanity. Jonas crouched in the dark corner of the warehouse, his senses on high alert. His body ached from the blast, the bruises on his arms a reminder of how close he had come to joining his fallen comrades. The air was thick with dust, the scent of burned metal, and charred earth clinging to everything. He wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to steady his breathing. His heart was still pounding, and his thoughts were scattered. The Vikor invasion was too overwhelming, too fast. How was it possible for an entire species to fall so quickly? He glanced around the small warehouse. It was almost untouched, a strange island of calm amidst the chaos that surrounded the city. The doors were rusted, but still intact. No signs of alien patrols. Jonas's eyes fell on the rifle strapped to his back. It wasn't much. A standard-issue military weapon, one of the last pieces of equipment he had from his platoon. It had already been used to take down one Vikor soldier, a stroke of luck more than skill. But he had nothing else to work with. It was either this or nothing. And Jonas wasn't about to sit around and wait to die. Hours passed, maybe more, before Jonas's exhaustion started to overtake him. He had long since stopped feeling safe. Every noise made him jump. Every shadow seemed to hold the threat of an alien scout or drone. But there was no time for rest. He had to move. He needed to find more survivors, to figure out a way to stop this. It was all starting to feel like a bad dream. A nightmare where he was the only one still awake. The city was littered with wreckage. Smoldering remnants of buildings, twisted metal, and bodies, human and alien alike, formed the macabre landscape that stretched out before him. As he walked through the ruins, Jonas tried to push the memories of his fallen comrades out of his mind. They were gone, and the chances of finding anyone else alive were slim. But he couldn't stop himself from hoping. Somewhere, out there, other survivors were hiding, just like him. They had to be. After several hours of searching, Jonas found what he was looking for, a small group of survivors huddled in an abandoned apartment building. There were no large gatherings, no organized resistance, just scattered civilians and soldiers, all just trying to make it through the night. They looked at him with a mix of disbelief and desperation when he approached, their faces pale, dirty, and exhausted. Some had weapons, but most were empty-handed. They had no clear plan, no leadership. Just like Jonas, they were winging it, waiting for a miracle that never seemed to come. "You're the first," one of the soldiers, a woman with dark hair and a scar across her face, said quietly. Her voice was hoarse from shouting over explosions. "We thought we were the only ones left." Jonas nodded, offering a tight smile. "There's more of us. We have to keep moving." That night, Jonas didn't sleep. Instead, he kept watch, scanning the streets for signs of Vikor patrols. His mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. The humans had lost so much, but Jonas wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't. The Vikor thought they had crushed humanity's will to fight, that their superior technology would break any resistance. But Jonas knew something they didn't. Humans had an uncanny ability to survive, to adapt. Over the next few days, Jonas trained the small group of survivors, teaching them how to use the alien technology scattered across the city. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make them feel like they had a fighting chance. They hacked into the Vikor's communications, learning how to avoid detection. They sabotaged alien supply lines and launched small-scale raids on their outposts. The Vikor hadn't realized it yet, but they were facing something they hadn't accounted for, a human resistance. It was only a matter of time before the Vikor realized they had made their first mistake. The Vikor were confident. They had wiped out entire civilizations in the blink of an eye, destroyed planets with their advanced weaponry, and dominated countless species across the galaxy. The notion that a single human could survive their attack was laughable to them. They believed their technology was so superior, their war tactics so precise, that nothing, least of all a primitive species like humanity, could pose any real threat. In the Grand War Room aboard the Vikor flagship, the Council of Warlords convened. They gathered around a massive table, their faces illuminated by holographic displays of the Earth's destruction. The planet's major cities were in ruins, its militaries scattered and broken. Their sensors indicated that the remaining humans were insignificant, easy to wipe out. They had assumed that the sheer scale of their assault would crush any remaining hope on Earth, and with it, any desire for resistance. "The human resistance is nothing," said Warlord Khazar, the leader of the Vikor military. His voice was cold, dismissive. "One man survives, and already we have received reports of small groups of humans attempting to form resistance. It is laughable." The other warlords nodded in agreement, their many tentacles or sleek, armored forms reflecting their collective arrogance. They had never truly feared the humans. It was impossible to fathom how a species that had only recently begun to explore their own solar system could challenge the might of the Vikor. The holographic display zoomed in on Jonas's region of operation. One of the Vikor's scouts had tracked the movements of a few human survivors, but they had yet to find anything substantial. The warlords brushed it off, eager to move forward with their plan for complete eradication. After all, they had already decimated the human military, and no force of this insignificant species could match their power. But in their arrogance, they missed a crucial detail, one that would be their first mistake. Jonas was still alive. And not just surviving. He was adapting. As the Vikor continued to underestimate the resistance, Jonas and his group of survivors had been learning. The alien technology scattered across the city wasn't just a tool for survival, it was a key to their rebellion. They had already captured several pieces of Vikor equipment, ranging from communications devices to energy weapons. While the technology was far beyond human understanding, Jonas had a sharp mind and a growing sense of purpose. He studied the alien tech, slowly but surely unlocking its secrets. His team was growing stronger with each passing day, and each skirmish they won sent shockwaves through the remaining pockets of resistance. Jonas's small group of survivors had begun to form a network. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were planning a counterattack. Using the Vikor's own arrogance against them, they sabotaged supply lines, hacked into military communications, and targeted isolated patrols. The Vikor were becoming increasingly frustrated, but their leadership still could not fathom the scale of the growing resistance. Their complacency would prove to be their downfall. While the Vikor Council continued to plan the next wave of destruction, a spark had ignited within the human survivors. Each small victory was like fuel to a fire, igniting hope in the hearts of those who had given up. But Jonas knew that this was just the beginning. They had to hit the Vikor where it hurt, directly at their command centers, their supply lines, their power sources. The Vikor were far from finished, and they were still making deadly assumptions about humanity's capabilities. But what they didn't realize was that while they focused on extermination, humanity was focusing on survival and turning the tables on their invaders. And soon, that underestimation would come back to haunt them. The Vikor were relentless in their pursuit, but they were not invincible. Their overconfidence was beginning to crumble. As the weeks passed, Jonas's ragtag group of survivors continued to fight back with increasing success, launching guerrilla raids against Vikor outposts scattered throughout the ruined cities. Their operations were swift, calculated, and brutal, each strike a precise blow against the invaders. Jonas had quickly realized that traditional military tactics would not work against the Vikor. Their overwhelming firepower, advanced weaponry, and unyielding numbers were simply too much for any direct confrontation. Instead, he adopted a different approach, a hit-and-run strategy that would exploit the Vikor's vulnerabilities. His team, small and nimble, became experts at slipping past enemy patrols, hacking into alien communication networks, and attacking where the Vikor least expected it. They ambushed Vikor supply convoys, seizing fuel, weaponry, and food. They sabotaged the energy grids the aliens had set up to power their war machines. Every successful attack made the Vikor more cautious, and every raid sent a ripple of uncertainty through their ranks. The Vikor, who had assumed that they were unstoppable, began to question their own control over Earth. The once imposing invaders, who had thought they could crush humanity in an instant, were now dealing with an enemy that knew how to adapt, how to fight in the shadows, and how to make every victory count. Jonas had become a symbol of hope for the survivors. He wasn't just leading these small groups, he was inspiring them. He shared his knowledge of the Vikor's weaknesses, teaching the others how to exploit their technology, how to move silently through the ruins, how to stay off the Vikor's radar. The more humans joined the resistance, the more creative and ruthless their tactics became. They used Vikor weapons against them, reprogrammed their drones, and set traps that left the alien invaders reeling. The tide was beginning to turn. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. The humans had a mission. They needed to strike at the heart of the Vikor invasion, and Jonas had a plan. A daring one. With the help of the small network of resistance fighters, Jonas began scouting a way to infiltrate a key Vikor facility, a command center hidden deep within the ruined city. This facility controlled much of the Vikor's operations on Earth. If they could disable it, disrupt their communications, and send a message to their command, it would deal a significant blow to the invaders. The facility was heavily guarded, surrounded by Vikor war machines, and fortified with alien technology. But Jonas had a secret weapon, the knowledge of the city's underground tunnels, forgotten passageways that the Vikor had never discovered. It was in these tunnels that the resistance would hide, prepare, and strike. They didn't need brute force. They needed precision, stealth, and cunning. Jonas knew the risk was high, but he was determined. The Vikor had underestimated humanity once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. It was time to hit them where it would hurt the most. The night before the operation, Jonas sat quietly in a dimly lit room, surrounded by the determined faces of his comrades. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Each of them knew the stakes. Tomorrow would determine whether humanity's spark of defiance could turn into a full-fledged revolt, or whether they would be extinguished once and for all. "We're not just fighting for our survival," Jonas said softly, looking around at the group. "We're fighting for Earth, and we're going to make sure they remember us." And with that, the plan was set in motion. The Vikor were about to face something they had never expected, a fight not just for survival, but for victory. The Vikor had grown impatient. The small skirmishes, the sabotage, and the hit-and-run tactics of the human resistance had begun to chip away at their sense of invulnerability. The once unstoppable force now found itself facing an enemy that refused to lie down and die. Warlord Khazar, his patience wearing thin, made a decision that would change the course of the invasion. If humanity refused to submit, then humanity would be crushed completely. In a high command chamber aboard the Vikor flagship, the decision was made. The time had come to deploy the ultimate weapon. The Vikor had spent years perfecting their orbital bombardment technology, a devastating system that could obliterate entire cities with a single strike. It was designed to leave no survivors, to leave nothing but scorched earth behind. Now, they would use it on the remnants of humanity. The first bombardment struck without warning. The sky lit up with a blinding flash as the Vikor unleashed their fury, targeting a cluster of remaining human strongholds. The blast waves were felt miles away. In an instant, entire regions of the planet were obliterated. Buildings, forests, and people turned to ash in the blink of an eye. The human resistance watched helplessly as one of their last sanctuaries was reduced to a glowing crater. Jonas, who had been preparing for the infiltration mission, felt the earth tremble beneath him. The shockwave reached the resistance's hideout, rattling the walls and knocking everyone off their feet. The sound of the explosion echoed for miles, a grim reminder of the Vikor's power. He knew the Vikor were ruthless. But this was something else. They had just decimated an entire city in a single strike, wiping out thousands, maybe more. For a moment, Jonas felt a cold wave of despair. It seemed as though there was no escape from the Vikor's wrath. Yet beneath that fear, something else stirred within him. Rage. He couldn't let this be the end. Not after everything they had fought for. Not after so many had already fallen. The Vikor had just made their second mistake. They had given him something to fight for. Gathering his thoughts, Jonas rallied his team. They couldn't afford to retreat or hide now. The Vikor thought they had broken the humans once and for all. But Jonas knew better. If anything, the bombardment had only fueled their fire. The resistance was more determined than ever. The Vikor had overplayed their hand, thinking that their orbital weapon could shatter human resolve. But they didn't understand the nature of humanity's fight. Jonas and his team knew the stakes were higher than ever. It was time to act. If they wanted to survive and take the fight back to the Vicor, they had to strike back, and they would do it with everything they had. The plan to infiltrate the Vicor's command center remained unchanged, but now they had more motivation than ever. The orbital bombardment had not only taken lives, it had shattered the fragile sense of safety the Vicor had held. They had revealed their hand, and Jonas knew exactly how to exploit it. The attack had been brutal, but it had also been a mistake. By showing just how far they were willing to go to obliterate humanity, the Vicor had created an opening. The resistance moved quickly, launching their own covert operation to infiltrate the heart of the Vicor military network. They were going to take down the very systems that allowed the Vicor to rain death from above. Jonas wasn't just fighting for revenge. He was fighting for the future of Earth, and he was going to make sure the Vicor paid for their arrogance. As the team prepared for their final mission, Jonas took one last look at the ruins outside their hideout. The war had escalated, but so had their resolve. The Vicor might have unleashed their wrath, but they had underestimated one thing: the strength of the human spirit. And that would be their downfall. Jonas and his team gathered in the darkened room beneath the crumbling remnants of a once thriving city. The walls were lined with hastily drawn maps, alien technology, and schematics of the Vicor command center that they had spent days studying. The destruction from the orbital bombardment had left much of the area unrecognizable, but it also offered a strange kind of opportunity. The Vicor were reeling from their own brutal attack, and that chaos was exactly what Jonas needed. "We can't afford any mistakes," Jonas said, his voice steady but firm. His gaze swept over the faces of his team. Survivors, fighters, each one scared but unbroken. "We hit them fast, hit them hard. No second chances." The plan was simple, in theory. The Vicor command center was located beneath the remains of an old government building, buried deep under layers of debris and rubble. It was heavily fortified, with an entire legion of Vicor soldiers patrolling the perimeter and advanced security systems keeping anyone from sneaking inside. But Jonas wasn't going in blind. He had spent weeks gathering intel, and the key to getting inside was the underground network of tunnels that ran beneath the city, tunnels the Vicor had overlooked. "We move in pairs, and we stay silent," Jonas instructed. "We're not here for a fight. We're here to shut them down. Once we're inside, we make our way to the main reactor. It's the heart of their operations. If we can disable that, their entire system will collapse." The team nodded, checking their weapons and equipment one last time. There was no time to waste. As night fell, the streets outside the hideout grew eerily quiet. The Vicor were still hunting, but their focus had shifted away from the resistance for the moment. Jonas knew it wouldn't last. They had to move now, or they risked getting caught in another bombardment. The tunnels were dark and narrow, but the group moved swiftly and quietly. They navigated through the underground passageways, avoiding detection from any lingering Vicor patrols. Every creak of metal or distant rumble of machinery made them tense, but they pressed on, determined to reach their target. After what felt like hours, they emerged into the heart of the city's ruins, just a few blocks away from the Vicor command center. Jonas signaled for the team to stop. They could see the heavily guarded building looming ahead, its massive metal doors and reinforced walls shining under the dim light of the destroyed skyline. The area was teeming with Vicor soldiers and drones, all scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. "We need a diversion," Jonas whispered. "Riley, you're up." Riley, a young but fearless fighter with a quick mind, nodded. She carried a small device, one of the few pieces of Vicor technology they had repurposed. It was a small EMP generator that, when triggered, could disable anything electronic within a large radius. The perfect tool to give them the opening they needed. Riley crept toward a pile of rubble, positioning the device carefully behind a cluster of alien tech. 5 minutes. Stay low, she muttered, pressing the button that would send a pulse through the Vicor's security systems. The seconds felt like hours. Jonas's heart pounded as he watched Riley's every movement. The EMP went off with a quiet whine, and instantly, the area around the command center went dark. Vicor soldiers scrambled, their weapons temporarily disabled as they tried to assess the situation. "Now," Jonas barked. In a blur, the team sprinted toward the entrance. They moved with precision, knowing that this was their only shot. The EMP had given them just enough time to slip past the outer defenses and enter the building. The command center was just beyond the reinforced doors, but they had to get through several levels of Vicor security before they could reach the heart of the facility. The Vicor soldiers were already starting to recover, but they were disorganized, confused, exactly what Jonas needed. Inside, the team spread out, clearing rooms and corridors as they made their way deeper into the facility. Every step brought them closer to their goal, but also closer to danger. Jonas's mind raced as they approached the central reactor. This was it. The Vicor had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to fight in the shadows. And now, they would pay the price. As they reached the final door to the reactor core, Jonas glanced back at his team. They were ready. The hard part was over. Now it was time to deliver the final blow. With a deep breath, Jonas nodded. The mission wasn't over yet, but it was within reach. They would either succeed or die trying. And Jonas wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not ever. The reactor core was a massive, ominous structure at the center of the Vicor command center. It hummed with power, its energy pulses illuminating the dark corridors around it. Jonas and his team stood before a heavily reinforced door, which led to the heart of the Vicor's operation, where everything, from communications to weapon systems, converged. This was the nerve center, and disabling it would cripple the Vicor's hold on Earth. But the door was locked. Jonas turned to his tech specialist, Amelia. Her fingers moved quickly over the alien interface, her eyes scanning the encrypted symbols that filled the screen. "This is going to take a minute," she said, her voice tense but controlled. The sounds of distant footsteps echoed through the hall. The Vicor would be recovering soon. Jonas knew they didn't have much time. "Make it fast," he ordered, keeping his voice low, though his insides were churning with urgency. He glanced at the rest of the team. Riley and Marcus stood guard at the ends of the corridor, their weapons ready. Every moment felt like an eternity as they waited for Amelia's hacking to break through the Vicor's security. A loud click broke the silence as Amelia's device successfully bypassed the final layer of encryption. The door slid open with a low hiss, revealing the reactor chamber beyond. Inside, rows of alien machinery glowed with an eerie green light. The reactor was a labyrinth of pipes and conduits, but in the center, the core itself was housed in a massive transparent containment unit, pulsing with raw, destructive energy. This was the key to the Vicor's orbital bombardment systems and their dominance on Earth. Jonas motioned for the team to move inside. The plan had always been clear: get to the core, plant the explosive charges, and disable the Vicor's technology for good. It was their best shot at giving humanity a chance. But as they stepped into the reactor chamber, Jonas felt a sudden shift in the air, an overwhelming sense of foreboding. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. Before he could react, the lights flickered, and the doors slammed shut behind them. The team spun around, weapons drawn. In the shadows, figures emerged, Vicor elite soldiers, their black armor gleaming under the reactor's light. The door had been rigged, and now they were trapped. "You've made a grave mistake, human," a voice echoed through the chamber. Jonas turned to face the leader of the Vicor soldiers, his deep voice laced with venom. The figure stepped forward, his silhouette imposing and monstrous. Warlord Khazar himself had arrived. The warlord's eyes glowed with disdain as he studied Jonas and his team. "Did you truly think you could infiltrate our most secure facility without consequence? You're nothing but insects to us." Jonas's heart raced, but he kept his composure. His team was ready, but they had been caught off guard. The Vikor were stronger, more numerous. They couldn't fight their way out of this. The explosive charges were still in their packs, but with Khazar's forces surrounding them, there was no clear way to deploy them without being wiped out. "We're not here to fight," Jonas said, his voice calm but defiant. "We're here to end this war. You're going to lose." Khazar chuckled darkly. "Lose? You've already lost. You are nothing but the last remnants of a dying species. The Vikor will burn this planet to ashes, and you will be forgotten." But Jonas didn't falter. He knew there was no turning back now. The time for negotiations was long gone. The Vikor had shown their true face, brutal, merciless, and unwilling to yield. Jonas had a different kind of fire in him, one that was born of defiance. He gave a quick nod to Amelia, who was already preparing the charges in the corner of the room. The Vikor had underestimated humanity, not just in combat, but in their will to fight for survival. This was the turning point. The countdown began. Jonas's voice was steady, but it carried a sense of finality. "You're not the only ones with power, Khazar. We've learned your weaknesses. We've fought for our right to live. And now, we'll take your war from you." The Vikor warlord's face twisted in fury. He lunged forward, but before he could reach them, Amelia pressed the button on her device. A series of explosions detonated throughout the reactor, sending shockwaves through the facility. The containment unit around the core shattered, sending a surge of energy cascading through the room. The Vikor soldiers screamed as the system went into meltdown. Jonas grabbed his team and ran as the facility began to shake. The Vikor warlord bellowed in fury, but it was too late. The reactor was failing, and the Vikor's technological grip on Earth was unraveling before their eyes. Jonas and his team sprinted down the corridors, knowing that they had made their stand. The war was far from over, but with the reactor destroyed, the Vikor had lost their edge. They had made their first mistake, and Jonas wasn't done yet. The blast was deafening, the shockwave reverberating through the corridors as Jonas and his team sprinted toward the exit. Behind them, the Vikor command center was collapsing in on itself, the destruction of the reactor causing the facility's walls to crack and tremble. The ground beneath their feet shook violently, sending debris flying through the air. The Vikor, who had once been certain of their victory, were now scrambling in chaos. Jonas's heart pounded in his chest as they rounded corners and raced toward the underground tunnel that would lead them to safety. The explosion had done its job, but they weren't out of danger yet. The Vikor were a fierce, determined force, and Khazar's wrath would not be easily quelled. There would be retaliation. Of that, Jonas was certain. "Keep moving," Jonas shouted, his voice cutting through the confusion. The team didn't need encouragement. They had one mission now: survival. The exit was in sight, but the Vikor were already regrouping. As they reached the final stretch of the tunnel, a sharp blast rang out behind them. The Vikor had sent reinforcements, and they weren't going to let them escape so easily. Jonas turned to face his team, his voice firm. "Go. I'll cover the rear." Riley, Marcus, and Amelia hesitated for only a moment before nodding and continuing forward, their legs pumping as they disappeared into the distance. Jonas watched them go, his mind racing. He couldn't afford to let them fall behind. But if they were to make it out alive, he needed to hold the Vikor back for as long as possible. Behind him, the sound of heavy boots echoed. The Vikor soldiers were gaining on them. Jonas reached for his weapon, preparing to face whatever came next. He couldn't help but think of the cost of this mission. The reactor was gone, and the Vikor's hold on Earth was shattered, but there were still so many of them out there. And now, he and his team were marked targets. The tunnel ahead was now a blur of dust and debris as the walls began to tremble under the force of the Vikor's retaliatory attacks. Jonas knew the Vikor were relentless, and they wouldn't rest until every last human was wiped out. But for the first time since the invasion had begun, Jonas felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for so long. Hope. The resistance was alive. The Vikor were faltering. They had struck a blow, and now humanity had a chance. He turned and ran, his weapon still raised, covering the retreat. The sounds of the Vikor pursuing them grew louder, but he didn't dare slow down. Not now. The fate of Earth depended on their success, on the survival of every last soul who had stood against the invaders. As they emerged into the open, Jonas's heart skipped a beat. They were on the surface now, the sky above them a grim reminder of everything that had been lost. But it was also a sign of the battle to come. The resistance was not done. Not by a long shot. The war had shifted, and the Vikor now faced an enemy they could no longer dismiss. Jonas reached his team, who were waiting for him near a makeshift extraction point. The ground shook again, and the distant sounds of Vikor ships confirmed what they feared. Reinforcements were on the way. But Jonas didn't flinch. He wasn't about to run. Not now. He turned to his team, the weight of their mission settling in. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice steady, though the fatigue of the mission was clear in his eyes. "They'll come after us, but we got something they don't. We've got the will to fight." The team nodded, their resolve hardened by everything they had endured. The Vikor might have been powerful, but they had underestimated humanity, and that was their greatest mistake. Jonas knew that no matter what came next, Earth's fight had only just begun. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Jonas looked out at the ruins of their world. But even in the destruction, there was a sense of rebirth. A new chapter had begun for humanity, and with it, the promise that they would rise again, stronger and more united than ever before.